Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, back in the pilot seat, but I will have a co-pilot with me today, the guest host from the last episode of the Steel City Underground podcast. Terry Fletcher will be here to run down Sunday's big game, the home opener for the Pittsburgh Steelers 2016 season, opening up Heinz Field and bringing in a guest who will be on their second straight road game for this season as well. The Cincinnati Bengals, who survived in New York last week, defeating the New York Jets 23-22 in what was a pretty ugly game for the Cincinnati Bengals. Had some ugliness for the Jets as well. Bengals come away with a 47-yard field goal, I believe, was the finish from their kicker, Mike Nugent. It wasn't pretty at times, and we're going to break down exactly where the Bengals may have gone wrong last week, where the Steelers have gone right, and what exactly will it take for the Steelers to win this game. At this time, I'd like to welcome Terry to the show. Terry, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Just getting ready for the matchup this weekend on Sunday.
You know what? Aren't we all? I mean, I can't recall a time when this was on the schedule. I was incredibly geeked up. I was disappointed because Vontaze Burfict won't show up in Pittsburgh. Not that we would throw trash on him like they would do on Big Ben in Cincinnati, but I really wanted the opportunity to at least boo him or scream some profanities that would get lost in all the crowd noise. And I'm sure many other Pittsburgh Steelers fans felt the same way, but we won't get the pleasure to do that on this Sunday. So Burfict suspended for 3 games, in part to just being a dirty player. And of course, we were talking about this off the air, the article that I had out talking about the Cincinnati Bengals are not the Steelers' biggest rival. We've heard this from several other Steelers players as well. The Bengals have lost 5 of the last 6 games to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you, of course, mentioned a very an interesting statistic between the pre-Marvin Lewis era with the Cincinnati Bengals and the Marvin Lewis era. Do you have those numbers handy there, Terry?
Yeah, he's 8-20 against the Steelers, and so that's, he's got to be going into this game very nervous and not knowing what he's going to do to stop our offensive plays, because we're just all over them.
Yeah, you know what? I'm already fed up with hearing all this stuff from the Bengals. Just in prepping for this show itself, unfortunately, I had to frequent some of those Bengals sites, and I start to get into the comments section because, I'm on the internet, and all I do is I start drifting off. And it was actually kind of funny because one of these Bengals writers said that the best play that Sammy Coates had was a ball bouncing off of him, and that's all the more that Eli Rogers did. They're really underestimating what the Steelers are capable of doing. Only one of 2 NFL teams last week to score 5 touchdowns offensively, the other being the Detroit Lions, and of course coming away with one of the bigger blowout victories against the Washington Redskins 38-16. Ben, D'Angelo Williams, Antonio Brown combined to be the only quarterback with 300 yards passing. D'Angelo Williams 100 yards rushing, and Antonio Brown's 100 yards receiving. No other offense, no other team in the NFL was able to accomplish that in week 1. Now, however, the Cincinnati Bengals, A.J. Green had a pretty decent game in week 1. He had 12 catches for 180 yards. And you would think that Andy Dalton throwing for 366 yards was a big highlight. However, the Cincinnati Bengals did not have a very good offensive game against the Jets, and a lot of people are disrespecting the Steelers defense by saying, well, the Jets have that great defensive line and blah, 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 blah. You had Andy Dalton was sacked 7 times. He was hit a total of 10 times in this game. They have a third-year center that, despite having started every game since he was a rookie, he still has some growing pains, and both of their interior linemen, both of the guards, had a very weak game against the New York Jets. These guys are disrespecting. They're really downplaying. They don't understand Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt among the other defenders that are there. Terry, what's your take on all of this? I can't understand. Like, do they really think? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off here for a second, but Steve McClendon, a former Steeler, was one of those defensive linemen for the Jets.
Yeah. They don't understand that if they actually looked at that first game, the Jets lost because they missed a field goal. Or the Jets won, I'm sorry, the Cincinnati won because the Jets missed a field goal. It's interesting that they forget that it was 1 point. It wasn't because they played great. And like you mentioned, all the sacks against, Dalton. And we're going to have to really step up our pass rush, because if we do what we did with the 3-man rush in Washington, it's not going to work. Andy Dalton's become a little bit more mobile. And so we're going to really have to go after him. But I think what's going to be impressive about this game, and I do say impressive, it's because, when you look at it, I mean, this is Ben's 25th game against Cincinnati. I mean, you're looking at, James Harrison's 22nd, Timmons 19th, even William Gaze have 17 games against these core players. And 50% of them, they've seen before. So there's going to be a lot of players that just know what these guys do. And it's not going to be, it's going to be very familiar to them. It's not going to be a new game plan.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot of people want to say, well, they didn't have – Andy Dalton got hurt when they played in Cincinnati, and then they didn't have him for the playoff game, and that's the reason why Pittsburgh won 2 of those games. And I think that's just hogwash. I know the quarterback is probably the most important position on the field. There's just no doubt about that. But in his last 10 games against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Andy Dalton has a 76.5 quarterback rating. So if you actually put him out there, he's been terrible. So one way or the other, it doesn't really matter if you have Andy Dalton or you don't have Andy Dalton. And the other thing the Cincinnati fans are really downplaying is, well, guess what? We didn't have Le'Veon Bell. Now, we're not going to have him for this game either. And we didn't have D'Angelo Williams in the playoffs either. And this Cincinnati Bengals defense was just, they were torched. I love the word torched, by the way. Torched. They gave up 152 yards to the Jets rushing for a 5.1 yard average. What do they think that the NFL's leading rusher coming out of week 1 is going to do to them? To me, it's just mind-blowing that you have this mentality that, well, I'll talk about AJ Green here in a second, but the Bengals just, I really don't get what they're going to try and do here. They have a brand new offensive coordinator because Hugh Jackson left and became the head coach with the Cleveland Browns. And they also lost a lot of their offensive weapons from last season. This is not the same team that you have from the previous year. Granted, they still have some talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, but they've struggled. Jeremy Hill has had, I think, 9 fumbles since he's come into the league, and that was evident with Ryan Shazier popping him he popped Bernard, and then he stole one straight from Jeremy Hill, and the Steelers know that going in. This is just one of those things where you want to talk about Andy Dalton, but you're going to downplay that Ben comes in. They lose at Heinz Field. One of those games that they lose, like I said, Steelers have won 5 of the last 6 against the Bengals. They lose because Ben just came off of an injury, and we all know how rusty that Ben usually is following maybe several weeks on the shelf when he gets hurt. So speaking of, I do think these guys are going to build a wall around Ben come Sunday. They're not going to let anyone sniff or breathe or even look at him funny. You kind of feel the same way. I think Ed Bouchette was the one who said that it might be, I think I said this with Steel Dad the other day, that he said there was going to be blood maybe pouring out of the Heinz Field ketchup bottles on the scoreboard instead of ketchup.
Well, I think that's true. And I think the one thing that's interesting, if you look at Cincinnati.com, they actually were talking about this game, and when they were really looking at they even called their team on-field viciousness, but they said since 2011 that, the Bengals, actually the franchise is 52-27-1. They've won 65% of their games, but in that, 27 losses, 7 of those losses have been handed to them by the Steelers. And so, and then the Steelers, of course, have won in that time span, almost 7, it says here 69% of those games. So we've got to, really kind of take a look at the big picture. And a lot of their defensive ends are saying, this is going to be a bloodbath. And sometimes I think I heard a quote from Whitworth. He said, sometimes you just got to whoop that other guy's ass across from you because you know him so well. I've seen that guy, 6 years in a row. And I think that familiarity is going to be really interesting this weekend.
Yeah, Andrew Whitworth, just he's got a big mouth on him. So does Domata Peko. We'll get to Domata in a second because he's going to be matched up against Marquise Pouncey. And one of the keys, if you guys didn't get a chance to read it, I know a lot of listeners just listen and then readers just read. If you happen to go across both platforms here with SCU, Brian Roach has a good preview for Sunday's game, and he talks about it being in the trenches. We also had the keys of the game coming out where most of us did a little panel vote. Mine was AJ Green, of course, and I know that a lot of the Bengals fans, if they come out with the victory, they're happy to have that W. They want to cite that Andy Dalton, he completed 3 deep throws of 49 yards or more, and he also had a 32-yarder and a 29-yarder. Of course, AJ Green getting a career high, tying 12 catches, 180 yards, and a touchdown against the Jets. And a lot of people were really down on Darrelle Revis for this game, and I thought we're looking at this too and saying, well, who's going to cover A.J. Green? And A.J. Green has been a killer for the Steelers over the last 6 games that he's played. 50 catches, 720 yards, and 4 touchdowns. It's an average of 8.3 catches, 120 yards in those 6 games. So I felt A.J. Green, definitely covering him, is going to be probably the key to the game. But you know what really helps is that pass rush up front. And like I said before, they were really struggling against the Jets. And I think I don't think the Bengals are downplaying this, but anybody who's outside just watching this on the boob tube downplays the talent of Cameron Hayward, Stephon Tuitt, and the Steelers aren't going to be sitting back here with that lax zone with no pass rush like they did against the Redskins. I think Javon Hargrave is going to get involved here, and he's going to throw this center back just the same way that McClendon and all these other guys did on the Jets defensive line 1 week ago. If they don't have their act together, they're going to have to throw their H-back Hewitt in there. Tyler Eifert rolled out for this game as not a pass or block option, so they're going to have to roll with Tyler Kroft, and they're going to have to use Gio Bernard or Jeremy Hill. And Jeremy Hill isn't much of a pass catcher. He has, but it's almost like we were talking about this as to whether or not the tight end situation had been patched up enough with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pretty much you can't have a situation where Xavier Grimble or David Johnson are out there, and it doesn't look like Rosie Nix is going to make it into this game, but you're pretty much putting the guys out there and saying, okay, we're going to be running the ball because they're going to block. And then we have Jesse James. Now, Jesse James did play 100% of the snaps, so it's a little bit unfair to say that, but you don't want to become predictable, whereas are the Bengals, how are they going to put all these different wide receivers and stuff on the field? Speaking of, no more Mohamed Sanu. He left for Atlanta. Right. No more Marvin Jones Jr. He's in Detroit now. So the only experienced guy you do have is A.J. Green. You have Brandon LaFell. When you leave the Patriots, you're pretty much, it's it. You're a pariah. I don't know.
Left the Patriots, exactly.
Yeah. Now, he caught all 4 of his passes and all 4 targets the last game against the Jets, and he had almost 100 yards receiving or whatever. One of them was one of those deep plays. I equate Brandon LaFell to somebody like a Darius Hayward-Bay. So I'm not saying that the Bengals can't get this done, but I look at all the different pieces that they moved on this offense along with losing Hugh Jackson. I think maybe Hugh Jackson may be the biggest loss that the Cincinnati Bengals team will face trying to move ahead this year.
Well, I think they don't also understand that, not just our starters up front, but some of the things that some of our backup guys, when they get rotated in, we have such a good rotation with, Arthur Moats, and they're getting in James Harrison, and he's going to be really getting after it. I am concerned a little bit about Geno Atkins going after Ben. That's the only thing that because he definitely has Ben's number on occasion, and we just have to hopefully make sure that offensive line is pretty strong up there. Otherwise, we could have some issues there. But other than that, I really don't think that they're ready for some of our backups as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a big game. That's another thing that's really downplayed is that we do have Marquise Pouncey, and we did not have him all of last year in any of those games. He's going to be hungry. That's who Domina Pecco is going to be matched up against one of their defensive tackles anyways. And, yeah, they do have a pretty strong front seven. They also have a decent secondary there. But I wonder how they're really going to match up after having given up all of those yards rushing to the Jets. Like I said, 152 yards. Which, by the way, when you talk about Jeremy Hill and Gio Bernard, they only managed 57 yards in the last game. I think the figure I had for Andy Dalton was something like 37 or 38 dropbacks in that game. So they're trying to throw these inexperienced guys as it is, and a lot of people are saying they're going to establish the run in this game. Well, the Steelers have traditionally always been a pretty strong team against the rush. I mean, even last year they were strong against the run. And they have a bend but don't break attitude on both sides of the ball. We saw both teams hold their opponents last week. It feels like a year ago. I'm this pumped up for the game, but they did hold their respective opponents to field goals or next to nothing. The big difference being is that the Steelers were just a red zone monster in the last game against the Washington Redskins. So I think that will be very interesting to see. I like the Domina versus Marquise Pouncey matchup, and I think our interior linemen are very strong with Ramon Foster. I don't think, and David DeCastro, of course, who just got the big contract extension. I don't see Domina just matching up in there and drawing very many double teams. You got Big Al that's in there. I think that's going to be the most suspect guy out of all of it. And, of course, D'Angelo Williams is very good blocking back. But if you've given up this much just to Matt Forte, and the Steelers, I feel, have a very good and very underrated offensive line, this could get out of hand very quickly for the Cincinnati Bengals defense.
I think one thing they're going to have to do on as far as our secondary, though, I think William Gay did not give up a touchdown last year. But Mike Mitchell, on the other hand, as much as he's a hard-hitting guy, he tries to go after the ball instead of make the tackle, and that's where I think he's going to have to just refocus and get, if he's the one that's being put on green, get him down. If we've got Shamarko Thomas in there, he's going to have to really step it up as well. But something I saw in the Washington game I don't want to see in this game, and that is when they put one-on-one Lawrence Timmons against a guy. Why would you do that? He's not fast. That makes no sense to me. Even John Gruden was saying, why are you putting Timmons against a guy? So I don't know if that was a misread or what that was, but I'd like to see our secondary at least double up on the one target it seems like they have in Cincinnati. And if we can do that and really stop him, I think we're going to be fine.
I agree, too, and a lot is made of the Bengals having this secondary with all of these first-round picks. To steal a line from Brian, I really want to say the A-hat word here. I try to stay family-friendly and somewhat PG, but that's pretty much Brian, especially Pac-Man Jones, is what he substituted the word Pac-Man for there. And just to give somebody that doesn't have a very vivid imagination here as to what I was saying, just make it a butt hat, which doesn't have quite the same ring to it. But Pac-Man Jones, he's been around forever. When did the wheels fall off this guy? They made a big deal about Dre Kirkpatrick, and some people were saying, oh, well, Antonio Brown only had 2 touchdowns against the Steelers in those games last season. Well, what did A.J. Green have? 2 or 3? I mean, that's kind of like a moot point because Martavis Bryant was scoring touchdowns at will on them as well when he was out there on the field. Now, obviously, we don't have Martavis Bryant, but we do. Now, we did all of this against the Redskins, and we get Marcus Wheaton back this week. So it's like, maybe the sky's the limit here. You have Antonio Brown, but Marcus Wheaton's going to open up things for that. And as you said, very familiar, the Pro Football Focus number on William Gay not giving up a touchdown. A lot of people want to attribute that to Antoine Blake being on the other side and just being completely abused. That might be true, but the Steelers themselves also have some first-round picks that could see some action in that secondary. It's not just the Bengals anymore. We have Artie Burns and, of course, the guy we traded for, Justin Gilbert. He's
coming in.
Yeah.
They say he's in this weekend, so that'll be good to see. I'd really like to see him come in and see what he can do there.
Yeah, a lot made with this. I think it's just, I'm not going to downplay that the Bengals, I don't want to consider them a rival. And in order to be a rival, you have to actually do something of consequence. And like you said, it was 8 for 20 is Marvin Lewis's record against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And you think if the Steelers didn't have Le'Veon Bell taken out in that game at home, and Big Ben was actually healthy, it might have been 6 for 6. Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Well, and not only that, the Steelers have beaten the Bengals twice in postseason in Lewis's tenures. They won his tenure. They've won 2 Super Bowls and lost a third in the same time. And what is he now? 0 for 8 in playoff games. I mean, they're looking in a window, but they can't seem to get past it. And we're just going there. I think our regular season is just a warm up to when we get to postseason. So, we're much more focused than they are on what the end result needs to be.
Yeah, and they're desperately trying to pattern themselves after the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that they've already found that path where they now have their Isaac Redman in the backfield, and they have a patchwork. They have an offensive line. I don't want to say patchwork because, Whitworth is a very good player as well. And then the other kid that they drafted they drafted him in the first round last year, maybe 2 years ago, and everybody said, oh, they took a tackle. Well, he's their starting right tackle now. In fact, if I pull up his name, he actually has a difficult name to say, so I don't even think I want to pull up his name.
Yeah, one thing I was noticing is that Ramon Foster's been very vocal on all of this. And he said, we've really grown up together. He says on both sides. He says, I've been playing against some of these guys. He said, going on 6-7 years. He said, and you don't say that about any other team because there's so much personnel change at this point. So it's interesting that he's saying that, and a lot of the other guys are saying the same thing. And defensive end, even Michael Johnson had said something to the effect that he says, sometimes when you're playing them, because you just know them so well, you just have to make sure that you're just one step ahead. And we just have to hope that, we push them one step backwards.
Cedric Ogbuehi is the name that I was looking for, and that's a fun one to say. Just like Domina, I wasn't exactly sure how to say Domina's name. That guy never really jumped out at the page at me until he jumped out on the field and tried to throw a punch at someone in that playoff game. But of course, let's find Mike Munchak and Joey Porter for some nonsense when everyone else is creating the chaos there. That's just just absolute ridiculousness. I know for sure that everyone is got their eyes peeled on this game. Referee will be Pete Morelli, and he's going to have his hands full. No doubt they're on high alert, and there's a lot of pressure on Pete Morelli too, because if you recall, now everybody makes mistakes, but this was the guy that was demoted. He was supposed to come in for one of the Steelers games, one of the big games, if I recall correctly, maybe even Sunday Night Football, and he got demoted and sent to San Francisco or something. And this was towards mid to late season when we already knew that the 49ers were kind of mathematically eliminated. So that was a demotion. Talked about this with Steel Dad, I believe, the other day, where you only have so many referees, so you couldn't just fire them or leave them at home for that week. So there's a lot of pressure on him too, because this is a pretty big game. This is something where he's going to have to maybe redeem himself and make sure he doesn't blow any calls. I mean, that's the only way I could really say it. It's just reality. It's not anything to be negative towards Pete Morelli or his officiating crew, but they have to get this right and they have to keep a lid on it. And now you have the new rule where if you get 2 of these the personal foul flags? I always think of it as like the yellow cards in soccer. So if you end up getting these penalties, you're ejected from the game after the second one, essentially the red card equivalent there. So a tall order for Pete Morelli on something that one side feels this is definitely a rivalry. I know you complimented me even publicly on Twitter about the article, but I do feel that one team is bitter and then the Steelers are better.
I just liked how you added the complete detail to that playoff game. So many of the reports that we've seen on that gave such a summary on that game. But I mean, just your step-by-step and just everything that happened in that game, it just put it out there. And it really was important for fans, both on the Pittsburgh side and the Cincinnati side, to say, look, remember what happened, and you're saying, oh, well, we were coming back. I mean, even to the point where, Landry Jones, he basically tanked in that game. And when they intercepted, I think it was Jones that intercepted, Pac-Man Jones, he ran into the tunnel. And where was the penalty? There was no penalty, and that would have brought the ball way back. So things like that, I think that just the fact that you have that detail, I think that's going to be hopefully fresh in people's mind as they read that article and say, oh, that's right. And they'll see that as we come into the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just the nonsense like that. I think some of that nonsense is going to be toned down some when you don't have Vontaze Burfict on the field, of course. I think he's the main instigator, no doubt. That's exactly there's no other way of putting it or sugarcoating it. I mean, the guy, he's an intense player, but he's also very reckless and has just you hear people talk a lot of times about the family or brotherhood of football. I think I heard Brandon Marshall say that after the Bills and Jets game on Thursday night in the post game. They had him on the podium and he said something to that effect, because they were talking about Tyrod Taylor getting pulled off the field by referee Ed Hockley, and this is something you're going to see a lot of now with with everyone. The whole focus on concussions.
Right.
And the referees are going to look and see that, if that play, who else is going to do it, by the way? The referees are the unbiased people on the field. They're the third team. They're the ones who got to make sure everything kind of goes straight down the middle, right? You're not going to see the head coach for the Buffalo Bills, Rex Ryan, say, well, I'm going to take my starting quarterback out, even if they feel it's the right thing, and Tyrod Taylor's not going to come off the field there. So, you know what I mean? You got, nah, I'm fine. Well, sometimes, you don't know. You could be your own worst enemy. So there was a lot of criticism towards that. I mean, the Twitterverse just went absolutely bonkers over it. I could see something similar happening if Ben gets rocked a little bit in this game. We heard a little bit about it with Seattle last year. But Brandon Marshall says this is a brotherhood and nobody ultimately is out there wanting to hurt the other person. However, I don't feel Vontaze Burfict is part of that same train of thought.
Yeah, I think the fact that he's gone is really a good thing. I think that's going to make a huge difference in the game overall. But we still have, and he made him I can't believe that he actually made him a captain. We still got, Adam Jones out there, which just makes my head spin around. But the thing I'm going to be interested to see is are they going to have, that meeting in the center field of the 50-yard line where they've got a lineup of all of the referees and, coaches basically saying, you guys stay on your side, you guys stay on your side. I mean, it just seems so funny to me that they have to go back to, babysitting so that everybody behaves themselves, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, you know what? It most certainly is. And that's something I hadn't considered myself. But in home openers, the Pittsburgh Steelers, 13-2. Of course, one of those losses all the way back, I think, in 2002. And then recently there was one in the game, the opener a few years ago against the Tennessee Titans, where a slew of starters, we lost all kind of guys like Pouncey and Larry Foote for the year in that game. I think it was a little bit of shell shock after starting out pretty hot. I think Heinz Field's going to be rocking. And you know what? The weather, though, could be a factor, just like it was down in Cincinnati for the playoff game back in January, expecting about 80% chance of rain and maybe even a thunderstorm. So you talk about people being on the field. We saw it happen just most recently. Ohio State Buckeyes had a very long lightning delay in their game at home just 1 week ago. It's happening a lot at the college level. It's definitely something that's a concern at the professional level as well. Just got to hope that it's not going to be one of those games where it starts pouring down rain and becomes sloppy, because that'll add yet another ugly element to what could be. I'm not exactly. I think the Steelers are professionals. I think the Bengals are professionals. And just like I was quoting Brandon Marshall, this is a brotherhood, and I don't think these guys necessarily want to kill each other. But this and the other right, they're going to come out playing hard. This is a divisional game, and these two have a history with one another, just as you had mentioned before, Terry.
Yes. I agree. I think it's going to be a game it's going to be a national televised game, so it's not going to just be on the NFL ticket or locally seen. And if you look at all the media pundits out there, they're saying they cannot wait for this one as a replay of that wild card game. So definitely something that's going to be interesting to see, and I'm looking forward to live tweeting out some of the things that are going to happen.
Yes, of course. And Terry will be live tweeting from the Steel City Underground Twitter account. If you're not following Steel City Underground, well, practically anywhere and everywhere, Facebook, Twitter, but we will be live tweeting on Twitter. You may even see some live streams on any of these platforms, including our YouTube channel from the tailgate lot. I'm just hoping we'll have the tent up. It's not supposed to actually rain until around game time, so I'm just crossing my fingers I don't get soaked just trying to grill some goodies out there, preparing for this big game on Sunday. So we'll see how that turns out. And you know what? I mean, honestly, I'm not picking the Steelers to lose here. I don't think they're going to have any trouble getting up for this game. I think they're more than prepared, and just having seen how Mike Tomlin had this team ready for week 1 already, it didn't look pretty in the first quarter, and at times there were some goofy things that happened, but sometimes you get lucky like that, you move forward, and I think this team is ready to roll.
I agree. I see over 30 points scored on the offense. I think we're going to have a score on the defense. Let's just hope we can get a couple of those picks, and I see a pretty low-scoring game, actually, for Cincinnati, so I'm calling it at 38-17.
38-17. I can never, I'm terrible with scores, and now that the 2-point conversion has come in and you have the extra point moved back, I think it's just like no man's land trying to figure that out. But I do think the Steelers go over 30 in this game. I'm not going to say that A.J. Green's held under 100, but I don't think he's going to be as big of the main focus as everyone wants to believe. I mean, we have some guys that are some legit track and just world-class athletes, talking about rookies like an Artie Burns or a Sean Davis. They're going to have help back there, just as long as, like you said, it just isn't Lawrence Timmons on an island in the middle of the field. We should be all right.
I think you're right. I think it's going to be a game for the ages, and we can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it'll be very nice to send Cincinnati back to Cincinnati for their own home opener, since they played on the road last week, as I had mentioned in the intro to this show. It'd be nice to send them back 1-1 and have a nice 2-0 advantage in the AFC North. So, Terry, everyone can follow you. What is your Twitter handle again? I think it's something very simple.
Terry and SoCalif.
That's what it is. And that's the part I always forget. I always think of SoCal when I see your name on there. So
somebody already had that.
Yeah, so you could follow Terry or follow the Steel City Underground account on Sunday. There's going to be all kind of fun stuff up there. We look forward to interacting with each and every one of you fans. Until next time, I want to thank my guest again. Terry, thank you for joining me on the show, and go Steelers.
Thank you for having me.
And ladies and gentlemen, that'll be a wrap for this edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I had failed to mention on several of the last shows, we still have the hotline out there. I know you guys want to talk some Steelers, so give us a call sometime. And somebody had mentioned it's not a local number. The reason it's not a local number is because it's a vanity number, and it was made so it's hopefully easy for each and every one of you to remember. It's 203-900, the number 4 SCU, as in Steel City Underground, or if you need the digits, 203-900-4728. That's the way my mom would probably remember it. But until next time, be safe, be good, look forward to your calls, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.